collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up on the programme this week, a study reveals how many girls in Cyprus are at risk of female genital mutilation. We discuss the implications and the law.
But they do not know, for example, the extraterritoriality principle, that if they take their child to the country of origin, that they can also be prosecuted when the crime is committed abroad.
We hear about trends in cybercrime and the vulnerability of the Internet of Things.
There's a 4-digit access code that could be used by hackers to get into the system, and once you've got into that system and you've got access to the Wi-Fi network, you can redirect all the traffic on the network through yourself. You can get information about people's entire lives.
And the kids in the Nicosia children's home spent last weekend in the Paphos district, getting to know nature.
We had the chance to explore all the creatures that live in the river. We used our nets, we used our stereoscopes, we studied all the insects and their life cycle. The kids got really excited with some of the leeches and the worms.
The European Institute of Gender Equality, EIGE, organised a conference in Nicosia earlier this week on female genital mutilation. It was to present the results of a study about how many girls are at risk of FGM in Cyprus. After the conference, I spoke to Anka Gitanar, who's from the EIGE, and she explained why they had undertaken the study and what the results were.
Well, we have estimated the number of girls at risk of female genital mutilation in Belgium, France, Cyprus, Italy, Malta and Greece. For Cyprus, it has revealed that between 12 and 17% of migrant girls are at risk of female genital mutilation.
And where does that take place? Because there's a feeling that it doesn't happen in Cyprus.
Well, we do not know, we haven't found evidence that it happens in Cyprus, but we have found evidence that communities are practicing. This could mean that they practice in the home country while traveling to the country of origin. This is a major risk factor that we have found through our qualitative research.
Now, one shocking fact came out of the conference that was held, and that was, if I understood correctly, that there is actually only one doctor in the government services here who knows and recognises female genital mutilation. So it could be that it is taking place, it's not getting reported, because doctors don't actually know what it is.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It clearly points out the need for professionals to get trained, not only in the health sector, but also in asylum sector, in schools, in nurse and midwifery. We need people who know about FGM and who are able to recognize it and protect women and girls who are at risk or who have undergone the practice.
And to report it, because the other thing we heard was that there have been no prosecutions, but that doesn't mean to say it's not happening, does it?
Exactly. Legal provisions on professional secrecy are extremely important. We have seen that around the European Union, not many countries have specific professional secrecy provisions on this, but where it exists, it is really a factor that helps identifying and reporting it and eventually leading towards prosecution of those responsible for it.
And what about the new data protection laws? Does that affect the ability of professionals to report this sort of thing?
It should not, because the legal provisions on professional secrecy are laws on their own, standing alone laws who are able to report these practices even beyond the GDPR.
What best practices in the research that you've done, because this is the latest research, but there have been previous countries who've provided this information and you've done previous research, best practices in those countries where the communities that are at risk have been reached and informed about the legal situation in the country where they now reside, and how can those be passed on to the authorities here in Cyprus?
Yes, indeed. We have found several good practices, mainly in countries where the FGM practicing communities are more established. For example, in Belgium and France, we see that civil societies are really working with the communities, acting as organizations who are willing to work with the communities so they can become agents of change. In terms of awareness of the law, we have seen that in a country in France where prosecution of FGM is also high, they have the most cases of prosecuted cases of female genital mutilation. We see that it really works as a deterrent factor towards ending the practice. And when people get sensitized about the law, they're also less willing to commit the practice. But it's not only about sensitizing about the law, it's about sensitizing about all aspects of the law, because most communities know that in the European Union it is forbidden, but they do not know, for example, the extraterritoriality principle, that if they take their child to the country of origin, that they can also be prosecuted when the crime is committed abroad. This is a very important factor. We see that this knowledge on the extraterritoriality principle is very, very low. So this is actually a point of a recommendation to further improve sensitizing among communities.
And the final point is that FGM is actually violence against women. It's gender violence, but a lot of people just look at it as a cultural thing that they may not agree with, but it's got nothing to do with them. How does that fit into the whole European view on gender violence and indeed gender equality?
Yes, well, in fact, we see female genital mutilation as a form of gender-based violence, and that is how we should tackle it as well. This is fully in line with the International Convention on the Combating of Violence Against Women, the Istanbul Convention, which clearly states it as a form of gender-based violence. This is important because if we consider it as a form of gender-based violence, we include it into our policies of combating gender inequality. When we want to tackle gender-based violence, we have to look at the roots of it, and the roots of it is gender inequality, the unequal power expressions between women and men.
Anke Gittenauer from the European Institute for Gender Equality.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
At the recent cybercrime conference that was held in Nicosia, the chair of the conference was Nigel Jones from the Criminal Justice and Computing section of the School of Law at Canterbury Christchurch University. He joins us now. Nigel, can you, in a sense, encapsulate for us what the outcome of the conference was? Because it was 2 pretty full days, wasn't it?
It was 2 very full days with lots of very interesting speakers, actually. The real purpose was to raise people's awareness of the current threats and trends in relation to cybercrime. And of course, the nature of cybercrime is that they will be completely different than the threats and trends from this time last year. And so this, if you like, is almost a catch-up knowledge activity to bring people up to date with where we are, the different types of crime that are now being perpetrated, how they're being perpetrated, and the differences between now and say, a year ago.
It's very important, isn't it, that Europol and all the other crime agencies, not just in Europe but across the world, have a similar understanding of the trends in particular and what needs to be shared.
Yeah, I mean, the trends do vary between different continents, for example, but there are commonalities right the way through. I mean, the main crime types that are seen across the world now are, for example, ransomware and business email compromise. And they're fairly consistent. They've been fairly consistent for the last 2 years or so. And sharing information between, or I should say lawfully sharing information between organisations is extremely important. And the mechanisms that have been set up to do that have become more effective. We had some really good examples of international cooperation across a wide range of borders to detect very, very serious cybercrime offences.
Now, if we come to what you do as your job in England and at Canterbury, what is that exactly?
I'm now the Principal Lecturer in Cybercrime and Electronic Evidence. My background is in law enforcement, and I've been involved in cybercrime since 1986. And most people I talk to now probably weren't born when I first started out in this.
Did we have cybercrime in 1986?
Yeah, we did.
Because it
but
started
was
off with very simple things, didn't it?
Well, technology was different in those days. If you remember that time, you were very lucky if you had a computer with a hard disk in, and if it did, it was probably a 10 megabyte hard disk. Which, although people laugh at that today, but in that time, in that era, having to deal with a computer and collect evidence from it, from 10 megabytes of data was probably the equivalent of something like 10 terabytes of data now, with the changes in technology and the changes in the ability of law enforcement to capture evidence and analyse it and present it in a way in which it can be accepted in court. So yes, there was, but they primarily were related to business. So, for example, the one I was involved was a fraud with 1,100 victims. And in the 1980s, you may recall that there were things like the miners' strike, and so when people got their redundancy, they put all their money into this guy who was running a scam. And all of the evidence was actually on these computers. We had to work out how to deal with it. There were no rules. So we actually chose a way to deal with it, and as it happens, it's the way that it's dealt with across the world now. Because it's around making sure that evidence will be admissible, making sure that it can be checked, and it's one of the best forms of evidence if it's handled properly still. So.
Well, I was going to say that it can be checked. It is an electronic paper trail, isn't it? I mean, it's very difficult, is it not, to cover your tracks if you're online?
There are mechanisms for doing that, and the organised crime groups and the serious criminals, they'll use encryption, they'll use virtual private networks to avoid being traced. They use all sorts of mechanisms to do that. But I think, as we've seen with the takedown last year of the Alpha Bay network on the darknet, through cooperation again with the FBI, Europol and the Dutch police and a number of others, it is possible still to break through these things that people believe actually are like a wall that the police can't get through. The stupid criminals are the ones who really do get caught because they don't protect themselves. But as I say, I think the law enforcement has become more professional in the way that it deals with investigations now. And rather than trying to sort of arrest everybody for everything, it's become very targeted. And infiltration of crime groups is something that's now quite common in order to work your way up an organisation until you get to such a level as a law enforcement agent that you can then identify all of the other people. Because very often with these organised crime groups, they've never met. They've only ever met online. And they don't need to meet. Why do they need to meet each other if they can do their business online?
Yeah, it does make it, in a sense, safer and simpler, doesn't it, for them?
Yeah, it does for them, really. Although, of course, the other thing is that if they're only doing it online, they're never really quite sure who's on the other end. It could be a law enforcement agent. It could be the person they believe it is. So it's not always possible to hide yourself completely when you're online.
What about how easy it is for, let's say, youngsters who are just geeky to figure out new ways of making a quick buck?
Yeah, I mean, there are different levels of sort of criminality, if you like. There's what we always used to say was, the guys looking to embarrass organisations by showing how clever they were. Some of these guys were looking for jobs, and they thought the best way to get a job was to show that you can hack into the system. So, you have got those, but I think there are also mechanisms in place now that law enforcement are adopting to try and intervene at an early stage when they're seeing very young people who are very technically competent and they look as though they're turning to criminality. They have intervention programs now where they try and look and say to these people, look, just understand what it is that you're doing and try and use your skills and knowledge for good rather than getting yourself in trouble early, get yourself a criminal record, and then you're going to have problems in the future. And there have been some quite good success stories in the UK in particular.
So do the law enforcement agencies recruit these people?
Not directly, but if you can prevent somebody from going down a criminal route, then surely that's better. They say prevention is better than cure. So I think that if you can dissuade a young person from going down a criminal path, then you open up all sorts of avenues for them in the future. That may possibly include working for law enforcement at some time in the future.
And what about the future, Nigel? I mean, we don't know, do we? This is the whole point about the way technology moves forward at such a rate. It's very difficult to keep up. But have you got any inklings as to where we might be 10 years from now?
Oh, no, 10 years, nobody knows.
2?
Well, let me tell you, if you look back at some of the quotes of famous people not so long ago, Bill Gates saying that there would be no need for a computer with more than 64 kilobytes of memory, I think it was. Somebody else saying there would never be a market for more than 5 computers in the world. I think that was the chairman of DC, Digital Electric Corporation, and somebody else, sort of part way through, with similar types of predictions, like nobody would ever need a computer in their home. And if they look back on those predictions now that they made in good faith at the time, they probably wish they hadn't made them. So you're not going to get me looking at 10 years in the future. All I know then, I'll be a lot older than I am now, and that's pretty old. But I think what I can say is that there are certain things that are coming around the corner. So you see now a great deal of use of virtual currencies by criminals. You see crime as a service, where criminals can actually go online and buy the tools to commit the crimes themselves, and we had some examples of that given here as well. And I think that'll probably continue. There are challenges on the legal side. There are challenges in relation to access to data by law enforcement agencies, and we heard today that Facebook and some of the other companies are looking to try and work together to create single point of contact regimes. And that's a sort of trust-building process, really. Not to do anything that's illegal, but to enable proper, lawful requests for data to be met properly, particularly in those cases where you've got emergencies, perhaps where there's a young child gone missing and they're believed to be in the hands of somebody they shouldn't be, and trying to identify who that person is through perhaps their Facebook profile, as an example, is one where you want immediate action. So having single points of contact, both in law enforcement and in industry, can facilitate that, and perhaps even say, at the highest level, save people's lives. There are other challenges as well. The Internet of Things.
I was going to mention that, because that is definitely with us already, but it's going to grow exponentially in the next few years.
Well, they say there's something like 7 million devices at the moment, and I gave the example today of the iKettle. And the iKettle, version 1 of the iKettle was great, wasn't it? The people buy one, they sit up in bed with their app and they'd say, OK, I'm just going to turn the kettle on so that when I go down the water will boil, I can make my coffee. The problem with version 1 of it was there wasn't a requirement for water to be in the kettle, so people went downstairs and that exploded in the kitchen. Version 2 came along and the security issue was still there. There's a 4-digit access code that could be used by hackers to get into the system, and once you've got into that system and you've got access to the Wi-Fi network, you can redirect all the traffic on the network through yourself. You can get information about people's entire lives doing that, and you can actually go online. There's a Google map online showing all of the unpatched kettles in one particular part of London. So all the hacker has to do is go on Google, find a kettle, go and sit outside the house, type in 4 zeros when they're looking for the passphrase, and they're in. And so security of Internet of Things devices is crucial. Fortunately, the European Commission, we had a presentation today, European Commission / European Union are insisting on the development of security protocols for Internet of Things devices. Now, how long that will take in order to become effective, if it's 1 or 2 years, we'll probably have 10 or 15 million devices by then that will be, if we say unpatched, what I mean is insecure. So what do you do with those 15 million devices? And we're playing catch-up. We're always playing catch-up. And in this, I think we're a little bit behind. I know a professor at a university in Scotland put forward a proposal to the UK government 2 years ago about having a security framework for Internet of Things devices, and the government rejected it at that time. And now the government are coming back saying we really ought to have security on Internet of Things devices. And so what they don't pick up on quickly enough is where you've got people who can see what's happening and they try and provide an early solution, and they're not listened to. And I know from experience, having tried to push the issue of cybercrime and electronic evidence back in the 1980s and 90s, people didn't listen because it didn't affect them and they didn't understand.
But I think they do understand now.
They've started to understand. The greatest thing for cybercrime in the UK was actually in the year 2000 with the I Love You virus, which spread through the House of Commons network. And so all the MPs got all these messages saying, I love you. Well, not many people love MPs, so they all opened the messages and they all got infected. And then they wanted to know why. And so because it affected them personally, and I don't say this was a direct result because there were lots of other things going on, but the following year we had a National High-Tech Crime Unit. So, when people are affected personally, when politicians are affected, senior people are affected, then that's when you get the response that you need, really. So.
Well, it's good to know that somebody is at least looking at the response. We've been talking to Nigel Jones from the School of Law at Canterbury Christ Church University about the challenge of crime in an ever-changing world.
Listen online to the Cyprus News Digest on YouTube or at cyprusmail.libsyn.com. The latest program is uploaded every Friday, and if you missed one, you can catch up there.
Last weekend, 9 lucky kids from the Nicosia Children's Home took a trip to Paphos and the beautiful village of Kritoutera, where Terra Cypria have their environmental studies centre. We're going to find out what it was all about and why they did it. Joining me from the Terra Cypria organisation is Vasiliki Anastasi, and also with us is Iliana Nicholson from the Andrea and Julia Dashins Foundation in Limassol, because they sponsored the whole event. Vasiliki, first of all, how did you get the sponsorship from the Dashin Foundation, and what were you asking for in terms of what you were going to do?
So we are always looking to find opportunities to bring children that would normally not have found the opportunity to be part of events such as this, or to have the opportunity to travel so far and engage in such activities. So we were trying to think of ways we could bring these children to our village in Kritoutera, and we had the lovely opportunity to apply to the Andre and Julia Dashins Foundation for sponsorship so that we could cover the expenses that are implied with such a trip to Paphos.
So the bus, the food, the accommodation and so on.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit, Iliana, about the work of the foundation.
Yeah, sure. So the Andrea and Julia Dashins Foundation was established officially in 2014. As the name suggests, it was founded by founders Andrea and Julia Dashin. It's a couple, a Russian couple who lives in Limassol, Cyprus. And basically what they wanted to do, their dream, their whole philosophy was to give back to the Cypriot community, to, let's say, to extend a helping hand to whoever needs it. Their priority, our priority, is basically children, because the couple has 3 children of their own. So it's a cause that it's very dear to their hearts. So when this cause came to us through the Terra Cypria organization, we just knew that we had to do it. The foundation basically takes actions. Basically, we give back to the community of Cyprus. We try to find projects where our help is needed. We always try to look at the cross-section of the society, and also we always try to give money to, we have these 5 pillars, which is education, it's health, environment, sports, and culture. And we always try to find projects and provide assistance and help where it's most needed in Cyprus, always. Our projects are always situated in Cyprus.
Right, let's come back to what the kids actually did. How long were they with you over the weekend? I mean, you say a weekend, when did they go, when did they leave, and what did they do in the middle?
So the fun started from Saturday morning, where I've heard that they got really excited because the bus that took them to Paphos was a major upgrade from the little bus that they have at their home. So the fun started while they were getting on the bus in Nicosia. We arrived in Gritudera early on Saturday morning, and we started by introducing ourselves. We played some ice-breaking games, and everybody got to know each other. So the employees of the study center, the volunteers that some of the kids have a good relationship with, that they spend some time with, and all the children and the social workers. We went on a tour around the village. We found out how people used to live in this village. We visited the oldest casino in the Middle East, which is found in Gritudera. It sounds like you're taking kids to a casino, but it's not like that. It's a museum. And the kids were very tired by that time, but I didn't let them get a rest because we had so many things to do. We visited the Gremniotis River, which is the river that runs through Gritudera. We had the chance to explore all the creatures that live in the river. We used our nets, we used our stereoscopes, we studied all the insects and their life cycle. The kids got really excited with some of the leeches and the worms. And once we got a hold of what's living in our river, we decided to attempt to visit the waterfall, which we made it to the waterfall. We had lots of fun. We got a bit wet, but it was okay because it's part of the fun. And we walked back to our village. And after our dinner, we had a lovely walk around our village, and we went on a bat hunt to find the bats that live in the village. We have a special application that can detect bat sounds that we can't hear. So kids actually had the opportunity to learn how bats communicate and how they travel. And by that time, we thought it's time for them to go to bed. And the next day, on Sunday, we visited the Agamas Peninsula and the Avagas Gorge. We walked all the way to the source of the river. We visited the Toxeftra beach, which is one of the turtle nesting beaches in the Agamas area, to talk a bit about the turtles and the importance of this beach to the turtles. And by the end of the weekend, we had the chance to go to Paphos Old Harbor and just go for a stroll to engage with civilization again. And then we said our goodbyes and came back to Nicosia.
What reaction did you have from the children as they were getting back off the bus? Did they say what they'd liked most, what had engaged them the most?
I asked them what they liked most. The answers were not the same by each child. Some of the older kids, who are teenagers, said that they really liked the stroll at the harbor, because this is what you expect, or they really liked, staying at the village and having fun and all this, and the tour in the village. And some of the younger kids remembered all the worms and the leeches that we saw. Some kids preferred the gorge. Some just liked, the fact that we were walking all the time. Some said that they really loved that.
Which is not something that most kids in Cyprus do very often. So how old were the children?
They were between the ages of 9 and 13. So it was a bit of a range, yes.
Now, is that all the children in the home? Are you going to do this again, perhaps with another group of underprivileged children?
These were all the children that at this moment that they're living in the children's home. We would love to repeat it in the future, because I know that there's children's homes like this in the other cities of Cyprus, and there's also homes for the teenagers who are older, between the ages of 14 to 18 in all towns. So we would love to repeat it in the future.
And if they do you think the Dashin Foundation will be up again to help with it?
Yeah, sure. Anyhow, we do a lot of projects with the youth homes and the youth shelters, because we're not only involved with trying to organize various field trips with children, but we also organize a lot of trips with unaccompanied minors who are living and residing in Cyprus.
You're talking about migrants now?
Yeah. But yeah, for us, it's if we can help, and if we can give access and provide opportunities to children who are less fortunate than most children residing in Cyprus, and we can sponsor a day or a weekend or a week that can give them something that otherwise they would never have the opportunity to experience. That's what we're all about.
Great weekend then for 9 lucky kids from the children's home in Nicosia who, with the help of the Dashin Foundation, had a fabulous weekend with Terra Cypria finding out about Cyprus's natural heritage. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.